It was New Year's Eve 2019 when health officials in China admitted they had a problem.
Health authorities have activated their most serious response level
after an outbreak of a new type of viral pneumonia
in central China.
A rapidly growing number of people were developing a dry cough and fever before getting pneumonia, and for some it turned fatal. Doctors have named the disease COVID-19 or Coronavirus Disease 2019, indicating that the type of virus is causing the illness.
Germany has reported its highest 7-day incidence rate of COVID-19 cases yet.
An epidemic is a disease that can be spread from
a variant, this new variant that
5 states, including New York and California, they must now have at least the first dose of vaccine.
Well, Philippine authorities are set to implement a community quarantine of the entire region of Metro Manila.
Positive for the
outbreak. Now, 9 people have died in China. At least 470 there are infected. And there are
hundreds dead, thousands infected across multiple continents.
outbreak of unusual pneumonia cases in the city of Wuhan, China.
The rising number of COVID-19 cases across Europe.
New COVID-19 infections reported.
Yeah, Kate, that's right. In fact, 20 states have seen some sort of an increase over the past 14 days.
For almost a decade, scientists chased the source of a deadly new virus through China's tallest mountains and most isolated caverns. They finally found it here, in the bats of Shitao Cave. The virus in question was a coronavirus that causes an epidemic of severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS, in 2003. Coronaviruses are a group of viruses covered in little protein spikes that looks like a crown, or corona in Latin. There are hundreds of known coronaviruses. 7 of them infect humans and can cause diseases. SARS-CoV causes SARS, MERS-CoV causes MERS, and SARS-CoV-2 causes COVID-19. Of the 7 human coronaviruses, 4 causes colds, mild, highly contagious infection of the nose and throats. 2 infect the lungs and causes much more severe illnesses. And the 7th, which causes COVID-19, has features of each. It spreads easily but can severely impact the lungs. When an infected person coughs, droplets containing the virus sprays out. The virus can infect a new person when droplets enter their nose or mouth. Coronavirus transmit best in closed spaces where people are close together. Cold weather keeps their delicate casing from drying out, enabling the virus to survive longer, while UV exposure from sunlight may damage it. This seasonal variation matters more for established viruses, but no one is yet immune to a new virus, so it has many potential hosts that doesn't need an ideal condition to spread. In the body, the protein spikes embed in the host cell and fuse with them, enabling the virus to hijack the host cell machinery to replicate its own genes. Coronavirus store their DNA on RNA. All viruses are either RNA viruses or DNA viruses. RNA viruses tend to be smaller with fewer genes, meaning they infect many hosts and replicate quickly in those hosts. In general, RNA viruses don't have proofreading mechanism, whereas DNA viruses do. So when RNA viruses replicates, it's much more likely to have mistakes called mutations. Many of these mutations are useless or even harmful, but some make the virus better suited for a certain environment like a new host species. Epidemics often occur when a virus jumps from animal to humans. This is true to RNA viruses that causes the Ebola, Zika, SARS epidemics, and COVID-19 pandemic. Once in human, the virus still mutates, usually not enough to create a new virus but enough to create variation or strains of the original one. Coronaviruses have few key differences from most RNA viruses. They are some of the largest, meaning they have the most genes that create more opportunity for harmful mutation. To counteract this risk, coronaviruses have a unique feature, an enzyme that checks for replication error and corrects mistakes. This makes coronavirus much more stable with a lower mutation rate than other RNA viruses. While this sounds formidable, the slow mutation rate is actually a promising sign. When it comes to disarming them after an infection, our immune system can recognize germs and destroy them more quickly if they infect us again, so they don't make us sick. But the mutation can make a virus less recognizable to our immune system and therefore more difficult to fight off. They can also make antiviral drug and vaccine less effective because they are tailored very specifically to a virus. That's why we need new flu vaccines every year. The influenza virus mutates so quickly that new strains pops up constantly. The slower the mutation rate of coronaviruses means our immune systems, drugs, and vaccines might be able to recognize them for longer after infection, and therefore protects us better. Still, we don't know how long our bodies will remain immune to different coronaviruses. This is why vaccines and studies for vaccines are important. What are vaccines? In March 1963, Dr. Maurice Hilleman was woken up one night by his 5-year-old daughter. She was complaining of sore throat, so Hilleman looked her over and determined she had the mumps. Unable to fall asleep, he was struck with an idea. He swabbed her throat for a sample and drove to the lab and got to work. 4 years later, his mumps vaccine was approved. It was the fastest vaccine had ever been developed until now.
New vaccine against coronavirus.
And it's incredible how quickly this vaccine and others have been developed.
This was done in record time.
This is extraordinary. This is the fastest vaccine development in U.S. history.
In 2020, vaccines for COVID-19 shattered the previous record, going from development to approval in a matter of months. That speed was driven by billions of dollars in global effort. But in some cases, it was also because of a breakthrough in vaccine technology decades in the making. Something that could shrink this timeline forward and change how we make vaccines altogether. Vaccines teach your immune system how to respond to a threat, and traditionally there have been 4 ways to do this. The 2 most common type of vaccine works by exposing you to a weakened or dead version of a virus or bacteria. The weakened virus won't make you sick, but it will teach your body how to fight the real thing if you're exposed to it later on. This is how the measles and annual flu vaccine work. Another less common type of vaccine does a similar thing, but uses an inert version of toxin instead of a virus. Well-known version of this is probably the tetanus shot. This 4th type of vaccine works a little differently because it only uses a small part of a virus instead of the whole thing. Common example of this would be hepatitis B vaccine and HPV vaccines. Some of the new COVID vaccine also rely on these traditional methods. For example, one COVID vaccine currently in trial uses this 4th method. It only uses one part of the SARS-CoV-2 virus known as the spike protein. That spike protein is what allows the coronavirus to enter your cells. When injected in your own body on its own, it's harmless. But your body will still recognize it as foreign threat and launch an immune response to fight it off, which is enough to teach your body how to fight the whole virus. But isolating and preparing the spike protein for a vaccine is a process. Researchers first had to modify it, then multiply it a lot, and then assemble the vaccine itself in a lab. In fact, one thing that all 4 of these types of vaccine have in common is that they all require growing and transporting large amount of live pathogens in a lab. And that takes a lot of time. A vaccine goes through many steps before it can be approved, but before anything else, it has to be developed. And working with live pathogens makes the process a lot longer. On average, it takes about 5 to 10 years for a vaccine to reach FDA approval in United States. But most COVID vaccines have gotten through this process a lot faster by overlapping the different phases of human trials, and by starting the manufacturing early. Some of the vaccines have also found a new groundbreaking way to speed up this first section. By shifting some of the work out of the lab and into your body, nearly every function in the human body is carried out by the proteins. So our cells are constantly manufacturing them. To do that, they make a single-stranded copy of a DNA. That copy is called RNA or mRNA. Each strand of mRNA holds the information on how to make one type of protein. The cell reads the mRNA, then follows the instruction and makes a protein. And that's where these two types of new vaccine comes in. They contain instruction, and researchers who developed this new vaccine called mRNA vaccine started with genetic sequence of the virus. They also decide to focus on the spike protein we talked about earlier, but instead of assembling and purifying that protein in a lab, they identified the part of genetic sequence that creates it, and then took a much faster route by synthesizing mRNA and using that as the vaccine, which saved months and times and money. Once it's inside the body, the cell reads the mRNA and begins to make harmless spike protein on its own. From there, your body's immune system recognizes the foreign threat and sounds the alarm. This is how the new COVID vaccines from Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna work. But main drawbacks of mRNA vaccine is that mRNA breaks down easily and it has to be delivered inside a protective fatty barrier and kept ultra cold, which isn't super ideal for vaccines that needs to reach all areas around the globe. Another effective new-to-consumer kind of vaccine works similarly, but uses DNA instead of RNA, which is much more stable. The COVID vaccine from AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson are this type. It doesn't require the ultra-cold conditions, but it does have its own drawbacks. To get the DNA in your cells, researchers use a harmless virus as a carrier. But over time, your body will build resistance to that virus, which means future doses using this carrier will become less and less effective, and the carrier will need to be updated. But in terms of efficacy, cost, and speed, these two new vaccine types have broken records. These new vaccines are a groundbreaking way to elicit an immune response. And while they'll have a big impact in how we fight COVID-19, their real impact is just the beginning. A vaccine that can deliver specific instruction to your body opens up a whole new world of vaccine technologies and disease treatments for things like cancer or HIV. Finding a vaccine was a turning point for the pandemic, but the pandemic might also be a turning point for vaccines.